is that we have a real stake in each other. Now again, we can pass the buck and one can say these are all stereotypes. It's all the media's fault, they're playing up the wrong people. But I would argue we have a real stake in each other, a real responsibility to each other, to fight the dominance of the violence or of the justification of harshness and cruelty in God's name. We have to fight this inside our own tradition. Each one of us has a major unfinished task in our own tradition. And each one of us has a major stake in the other faith, in the other religious communities, also winning this battle. Because the truth is, because of the world we live in, an action of extremists in any one tradition is broadcast and blast throughout the world and affects the credibility inside our own tradition. Not to mention that the extremists in each tradition point to the other position in the other community as justifying and validating their own particular position too. So we have a very real stake in each other, and there's a really major challenge both to fight inside our own faith and in the public square for these viewpoints. So I think in a very real sense, this is part of what we have to factor in today. I want to give again a personal witness. When after encountering the Holocaust, emotionally, intellectually, theologically, became the revolutionary, disorienting experience of my religious life, I realized I had to rethink my religious understanding. And I came to conviction, for example, that every religion, not just my own, but every religion, my own as well, had to overcome its own traditions of contempt and disrespect for others. And my religion, like every other religion, has great elements of respect for other religions and great elements of affirmation of God's universality, but it also has some pretty telling and powerful elements of disrespect and contempt for the other. Just as the other faiths, although we don't like to admit it to ourselves, and in dialogue we have attempted overwhelmingly to bring out our resources of affirmation and respect for the other. And I came to the conclusion that I'd have to work on rethinking my own internal tradition. When I came to the conclusion that the most important religious response to a Holocaust and its degradation of human life, and not just killing, but cheapening and degradation of human life, was to reaffirm the preciousness of every human life in every form, and to struggle for equality against oppression and power. When I came to the conclusion that it was this generation's responsibility, and I as an Orthodox Jew couldn't hide behind the notion that the great authorities lived in the past. It was God's revelation in the past, and therefore had no authority to change or to confront the problem. When I wrestled with these questions, I have to admit there were periods when I got more emotional support and more theological strengthening from Christians, from Muslims, from non-Jews, than I got in my own community. That's also part of the internalization, that we have to have the courage to do that. It did not change my conviction of my own faith or my calling or my community, but it forced me to acknowledge that God was operating in other communities and that that operation was good and healthy and healing for me and for my community. Second observation, and we're referring now particularly to the call which Crown Prince Hassan has given all of us, which I accept and I think and welcome, and we all participate in this conference in that spirit, to focus our religious thinking on the priority of overcoming poverty. In a way, it is a call to focus on helping our fellow human beings who are in the image of God. And here again, I'm using the Jewish terminology, image of God. We are all created in the image of God, says the Bible, says the Hebrew Scriptures in Genesis. But I believe this concept, I've heard specific citations of sources both in Christianity and in Islamic Quranic tradition. So I'd like to develop for a moment the image of God, what it means to take responsibility for a fellow human being in the image of God, based on Jewish sources that I think can lend itself to all of our communities sharing and developing our own images in the same way. Of course, it starts with the idea that the Creator God, again a view we all share, who has not just brought the world into being, but sustains its life, and sustains all life. What does this God do in giving us a religion, in this act of love, of reaching out to human beings? We have to have the courage to believe in the end, although God wants our worship and we owe this glorification to God, in the end, God has given religion not because God needs to be made more grandiose. What can our praise offer? What can our pathetic, human limited words add to the infinite glory of God? But because God would like to show us the way to reach out lovingly, responsibly to God's creatures, the objects of God's love. The Talmud says, therefore, the image of God can be seen as endowing every human being born in the image of God with three fundamental dignities. Those dignities are infinite value. Every human being should be treated like a creature of infinite value, because to save one life, therefore, is to save a whole world. For 1 times 1 infinity is infinity, and 6.6 billion times infinity is infinity. Every human being should be treated like infinite value. Secondly, every image of God is equal. There is no preferred image of God, that's idolatry. And thirdly, that every image of God is unique, because human images can be replicated, but images created by God, each one is unique and unduplicatable. There's no one like it in the world now or ever will be. And again, these sound like lovely religious concepts until we concretize them. What does it mean to say my life is infinitely valuable or your life is infinitely valuable? Well, it means how do you treat them? And what kind of money would you spend on them? In the last decade, a human image, a Klimt painting, sold for $140 million. In the last year, a Picasso painting sold for $115 million. Well, if a Picasso is worth $115 million, how much is an image created by God worth? But that's another way of saying, the answer, of course, is infinitely more. But again, let's be concrete. When a Japanese insurance company bought a Van Gogh 20 years ago, at that time setting a world record for Van Gogh for $82.5 million, what did they do with the Van Gogh? They put it in a special museum, in a special room, which was climate controlled, not hot, not too cold because it can affect the canvas, not too wet, not too dry because it can break up the paint.